4 months after losing my mom to pancreatic cancer, I walked 17 miles in complete silence, just me and my thoughts. That was 9 months ago. And honestly, I'm still not back to my complete self. Grief just doesn't work on a schedule. I'm learning that. It's June, Men's Mental Health Month, and something in the back of my mind has been telling me maybe it's time to do another 34,000 steps. And somehow, magically, without really planning for this to happen during Men's Mental Health Month in June, I reached out to the man who came up with the 34,000 step challenge, and he agreed to be a guest on my podcast. Tim, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Thanks for having me on.
S- So, if you could just give us a little background of what the 34,000 step challenge is, since I'm assuming most people haven't heard of it besides me.
Yeah. It was a challenge that came about while I was walking across America, and I was doing between 20 and 30 miles during the day. And I had read a stat somewhere that around 34,000 men every year in the United States die by suicide. And the experience that I was having on the road of walking, not just that length, but in silence, without headphones, without music, without podcasts, no distractions, wasn't checking social media on my phone or texting people, really brought such a deep level of presence and I would say self-connection. I felt like I was tuning in to and experiencing a lot of these things like suppressed emotions and old patterns and programming and stuff I carried with me my whole life. And it was after walking one day and I was sitting in bed, reflecting on the day's walk and getting ready to go to bed. And I was like, man, I had so many guys, reaching out to support, and women reaching out to support the walk, donating, and that kind of stuff. And I was just thinking it'd be really cool to have a way for people to experience on some level what I'm experiencing on the road. And so 34,000 steps is, depending on your foot stride, let's say about 16 to 19 miles, depending on the person, which would take, about 5.5 hours or so if you got a really good pace. So it's a really good time, on the it's a good amount of time on the road. So just came about to invite people into push themselves physically, but more so push themselves mentally and emotionally and learn to face challenge in life and really fear, because I know a lot of people went into that challenge a little fearful or worried of what was going to happen, and do so just with presence and bring presence to each step and know that every step you take represents one man in the US who takes his life over the course of a calendar year. So it just, yeah, it just kind of came about one day after the walk, and it was really cool to see how many people, really, really cool to see how many people ended up taking on that challenge.
Yeah, when I it took so I attempted to do it one week and then I pushed it off. Like I was like, I'm gonna go out the door, I'm gonna wake up early, I'm gonna go do it, and then I didn't do it, and it took another week to finally do it. And when I was in it, it's like, oh, this is fine, this is nothing, this is just a walk. But it really does, with the being disconnected and being very present with yourself. It's unbelievable how therapeutic it is, and you can't sort of run away from your thoughts, and you have to sort of, in a way, dig yourself out if you go to like a native space. So it's very, very powerful. And so I don't originally know how I found you on LinkedIn, but I'm grateful at that period of my life to find something like that. It seems so easy, but it was physically and mentally a challenge.
Yeah.
And I would definitely recommend it to people. It's definitely worth it. How long did it take you to walk across the United States?
163 days.
And did you have any, it was just you solo? There was no like support team that you see some of these people do, like riding across the states on a skateboard and things like that, but they have a van behind them the whole time?
For the most part, I was solo, and I was pushing all my gear in a little running stroller. And then I had a couple times where friends or family came to meet up. Maybe they would drive a support vehicle for a day or 2 days or a week. But the majority of the walk was, yeah, was solo.
And when you finished that, because I mean, that's a huge chunk of time and a lot of self-reflection. When you finished that, what were you feeling? And did you sort of suffer from any sort of depression once it was all over? Because I imagine you just sort of accustomed to that being like your life in a way, to sort of get up and do that every day.
Yeah. I think what I experienced like on the final day, and really in the last few days, was honestly really what I experienced for much of the walk, which was just total presence, especially the last third. Just really locked into this moment, this step, this mile today. Okay, I'm just gonna walk X amount. I get to my spot, I figure out food, and I go. And the cool part was it really simplified life in a way. I mean, I had one thing to do every day. And so that aspect of it was really amazing to experience. Obviously, it was really challenging and physically taxing, mentally taxing, emotionally draining. But I didn't go into the walk looking at it like a race or an accomplishment, like climbing Mount Everest or doing an Ironman, something that I wanted to complete. I knew the completion would be a milestone, but my whole point and purpose for doing it was the transformation that I knew would happen on the walk if I approached it like kind of like a meditation retreat. I just thought, I'm like, man, what would happen if I spent 6 months on the road every day for 6 to 10 hours in a walking meditation, focusing on my breath, working on being present, maybe doing a mantra sometimes, surrendering, everything to God, to the universe, to source, spirit, whatever. And and I think that was something that really helped me. So when I got to the end, I wasn't like, oh man, I achieved this massive thing. It didn't feel like an achievement. I just was more tapped into what transformation am I going through? There were parts of me that you could think of it this way, like I left on the road. These old identities, these old versions, these fears, these insecurities, this heaviness I was carrying around with me for so many years. And that was really the purpose of it for me, is how do I come face to face with those things, the parts of my life that I haven't wanted to face, or have been too painful, or I haven't known how to work through, and allow the walk to be the vehicle to transform me. And that's really what it did. And so post walk, there was definitely a period of in Buddhism, they talk about there's this period called the Great Doubt, which often comes after a period of insight or realization. And, for me, I felt like my whole identity structure, who I thought I was, my motivations, what I was going to do after the walk, that stuff, all of that just really crumbled and dissolved on the walk. And so I was left really with this blank canvas, this emptiness, not from a negative standpoint, but from that's why I use the term blank canvas. A blank canvas is blank and empty, yet what it represents is pure possibility. And
Mhm.
anything can be created on top of it. And so that phase lasted for about 6 months. And that part was really hard because as I was trying to get into old routines or old disciplines or old things to get clarity or what I should work on, all of it was falling flat. Nothing was working. And so, what that period was really about for me was a lot of slowing down, a lot of spaciousness, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of just being present. And because I could sense something would arise at the other end of it, and I just wasn't going to be able to force my way through it. So that was kind of that challenging post walk experience.
Wow. It kind of makes sense why there's these people randomly see an article online that started traveling back in the 70s and never stopped, because I think they just can't handle, like, once you start on that type of journey, going back to your old life, you have to face all of those things that you've been avoiding, and it's easier just maybe to just keep going forward and avoid it in like a new positive way. Um, in terms of how did you end up getting to where did this idea originally come from to walk across the United States? And where were you years or a year prior to that? What has got you to where you are now?
You know, I was kind of a former life. I was in corporate, I was in the tech industry, I was in sales, I was leading sales teams, leading offices in Silicon Valley in New York City. Um, and in that period, everything on paper was great. You know, the titles, the money, the company I was working for, the stock options, where I lived, awesome, right? Externally, the boxes were checked. But internally, things were actually going the complete opposite direction. So from about 2016 to 2020, the middle of 2020, I experienced depression on and off. Depression, anxiety, burnout, for the better part of 4 years. And I didn't tell anybody. I never got help. I thought I had to figure it out on my own. You know, the stigma for men, and I know you mentioned it being Men's Mental Health Awareness Month in May, or May was, I think June is, I don't keep track of all these months, but I know we're around that time.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and, and I ended up getting out of corporate. My performance was tanking, and I ended up getting fired for performance after years of President's Clubs and awards and, you know, all that stuff. And I started going inward. I realized that, man, I've moved across the country 4 times in 4 years. I changed jobs 4 times. I was trying everything externally. I was traveling, you know, I was doing all the things to escape, to numb, to avoid, I thought I was trying to solve it, but really I was in a pattern of avoidance and resistance. And in 2020, I started to work with it, and I started to lean into it, and I started to try to understand it. And I got a lot better, and I turned the corner with depression. I ended up starting a company that worked directly with men. So I started doing like men's group coaching, and it was going really, really well. And I did that for a few years and helping guys through a lot of the similar stuff I did, or that I went through. And then 2024 hit, and something deep within me started to come out. And it was this heavy, dark, apathetic depression. And it was the part that was still in there that I had tried to over optimize, you know, through the self-help and self-improvement world and habits and discipline and all that stuff that I did for a few years. And this part wasn't being suppressed anymore. And so it came out in the summer of 2024. And for about 100 days, I had this depression that was so heavy, and I was so apathetic. All of the stuff I had done before, I call myself high functioning, or I had like high functioning depression from 2016 to 2020. I was still going to the gym, going to work fine. This period, I was not at all. Sleeping in really late. I barely could get outside. Like, it just rocked me, and I had no idea what to do. And I started having suicidal thoughts. And that was the first time I really experienced those. And it was increasing with intensity and frequency during that period. So it was pretty scary. And all the while I was still running this men's coaching program. So you can imagine the stories that would come up potentially about, you know, me being in that position. How do I help people when I'm going through this, you know, feeling like a fraud, and, you know, all the shame cycles that a lot of people deal with in different ways. And, a few things happened that year. I ended up going on an amazing trip to India, kind of a soul searching pilgrimage that was incredible. And then when I got back from India, I felt it was an incredible and amazing. And I felt myself start to slip back into that depressive state. And I just saw a video online of a guy who said in 2019, he was going through a really tough period in his life. And he said the words when I walked across America. And the second I heard him say those words, I felt this, like, I describe it like a lightning bolt going through my body, like from the bottom of my feet to the top of my head, full body goosebumps, just this flush of energy. And before I could really register what was said, the thought came into my head that was, I'm going to do that. Like, that's the thing. That's the thing that I felt I was like anticipating some big shift this year. And I was like, holy crap, that's it. And I'm not a big camper. I have never run a marathon. I don't do a lot of hikes. Like I'm really active in other ways, but this was not in a area, where I have a skill set. And so I just leaned in and I started planning. And as I started planning, I realized one thing I wanted to do on the walk was no distractions, treat it like a meditation, but also share everything I went through on the walk. The pretty, the beautiful, the milestones, but also the ugly and the raw and the vulnerable and the stuff that's going to come up, the injuries, the stuff I struggle with mentally, what the stories are, like how I'm working through them. And as I thought about that, I wanted to also do the walk for men's mental health and raise money for, charity and everything. So that's kind of how that initially unfolded and came to be. And I planned for about 90 days. I started spending more time on my feet, trying to walk more and more, planning on my gear. I planned the route and everything, and then hit the road about 90 days later.
I want to go back to when you were maybe at your darkest. Did you seek out therapy or any sort of traditional help in that way?
I've worked with, so up until 2020, I hadn't worked with anybody. I had a really hard experience going in to try and get help with a psychiatrist at the time. Um, it was not a pleasant experience, and so I kind of had resistance to that. But since 2020, I've worked with so many different coaches, psychotherapists, I would say, hypnotherapists. I mean, all types of things I've tried in that period. There was a couple different coaches and therapists that I had worked with, and it was okay. I've always had a hard time finding somebody that I felt truly could connect with me and truly could understand me. And I don't know what that is, but I've always kind of had this wall up when I meet, yeah, when I meet coaches and stuff. So I was trying a bunch of that. I was trying plant medicine and, different psychedelics and like everything I was trying to do. I was exercising and time in the sun, all this stuff, we yeah, we know is good for us.
Uh, do you think that's the biggest barrier of why, and not just men, anyone in general, struggles to get help when they're really, really in need, is because you're already in a dark place, you're struggling to meet your basic requirements to live, feeding, sleep, not like staying in bed, and just to get out of bed when you're in really a dark place takes so much motivation. And then you have to go and find a therapist that
Yeah.
you get along with, and maybe can help you do this, but most people at this point might not have money, or there's all of these compounding issues that could be occurring, and it's the time when you have to dig yourself out. And do you think that's the reason people sort of just give up, because it's just so overwhelming to dig yourself out of that hole?
I think that's part of it. I think what's happening upstream is when you're in that state, there is a undertone of feeling separate from other people. So the mind tends to get really loud and get really negative and comes up with stories about maybe being broken or nobody would understand, or I don't want to make others, like I don't want to be a burden. It's my stuff to figure out. And so I think everything you said is accurate. And when we look at like, what are people struggling with, it's not just the feeling of heaviness, it's the added resistance to it. People don't want to feel that way, right? That's where where the suffering comes from, is not accepting what we're actually going through. And so when we're in resistance to it, we're less inclined to reach out because we frankly just don't want to feel that way. We don't want to, like, we don't even want to admit that. And so and to your point, going through the process of finding somebody in itself is hard. Even if you're feeling great and you're like, okay, I really want to get into a rhythm of speaking with, let's say, a counselor regularly, just for a checkup or just to, keep things topped off. And it's like, man, someone who you just connect with, for one, somebody who, for me, I feel strongly that I want to talk to somebody who has been through what I'm going through, right? And that's a really big thing with men, where if men know that the other person, whether sitting across from them or next to them or in conversation, when another person gets what you're going through because they've also experienced it, that's actually what opens people up. So that can certainly be a big challenge. And then all the other things you're sharing is like, man, I don't, is the person I'm giving an hour to try out, are they even skilled at what they're doing?
Yeah.
You know, that's a big thing as well. And then the financial piece too for some people. So you're right. There's a lot of factors, and because of stigma, culture wide, these conversations tend to not happen within friend groups as much, especially with men, right? And so when that happens, we feel even more like we need to self isolate because my friends aren't. Tom never talks about it. So I don't want to bring it up to him because he can't handle it, or he doesn't want to talk about that. All he wants to talk about is sports, or, we come up with these stories that again keep us disconnected from others. And so
Yeah.
when we don't have those spaces, it creates this self-perpetuating cycle of pain.
Yeah, it's it's so many things. With me personally, I realized that when I was in a really, really bad place, I even texted, because I'm in France, I texted the American suicide hotline number, and was trying to seek help at that point. And I don't even know if you're talking to a human, to be honest. I think it might be ChatGPT.
Mm,
I don't think they do that, but it did seem that way at the end, because it said, "I'm a great mother." After a very long 20 minutes of like breaking down my situation, and there was no way I said I was a mom or a
mm,
woman or anything like that. But for me, because I have a sense of humor, in that dark moment, it brought me out of it, because it's so comical. Of like most chat support these days, is that you're like,
yeah.
is this a fucking human? Like, or is this a robot? Or like this is my life. I'm thinking of killing myself, and I literally can't even get like a robot to understand me. So that was comical. And then to seek out a human being and go find a therapist, because I'm in France and because of the weird
Mm,
regulations. I have a French speaking therapist I find, and do 4 sessions with her, and then she just ghosts me, which I found out in the US is totally illegal.
mm,
But these are type of things that you're like, why do people not seek help? Why do they just go out and kill themselves? Because it's too much. It's too much to take on for some people, and most people are in a dark place, and the person you seek help, whoever that is, might not be there, and that it just takes their one attempt, and if you don't show up, they're just gonna be like, this is the sign. So it's very depressing to know that, like, and this was BetterHelp, and I've posted about this, and I haven't heard one positive thing about BetterHelp therapists. And so I have no problem calling them out. But I think it's very sad that people are in need, and it takes so much effort for them to seek out the help they need. So that's really why I wanted to have this conversation. So maybe one other person sees this and doesn't end up going down that dark hole that we've both have seemed to be at. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is being being a man, and seeking help with friends. On paper, or like in the movies or in TV, it always seems like, oh, you just talk to a friend and you feel better. When I did that, and I'm wondering if you did this as well, if you did open up to a friend, it's like you open the can of worms for yourself, but for their problems as well. And so
yeah.
now you feel guilty not addressing their problems.
Mm.
And so then it becomes this weird toxic communication style, where it's like, who can better the worst scenario?
Yeah.
Like, who can end the conversation with like the shittiest story? I don't know. Did you have that experience?
I didn't. I'm pretty introverted pretty much have been a lone wolf on this. I mean, a lot of my learnings and processing has happened in the privacy of my own space. Not all of it, certainly not all of it, but like the majority of it. And so a lot of books, a lot of podcasts, a lot of just writing, a lot of meditation. Um, and I think this point though, it's really interesting you bring it up because when we were talking about the suicide hotline and when people really need help, that's so far downstream that if we improve that part of it, yeah, it's amazing and it's going to help people in this moment of crisis, but that's not going to solve what's happening at a societal level. We have to look so much further upstream, and what you pointed at or what you're talking about with this dialogue with friends is a symptom of a much larger problem. And it is this lack of understanding, this lack of skill set with things like self-awareness, emotional regulation, understanding the things that really drive us, like our patterns and our programming, right? And our thought loops and the stories we tell ourselves and the identity and who we think we are. And so that is kind of the basis. And there's another part, which is a really hard skill set, which is how do you, two parts of it. How do you be the person sharing what you're going through? How do you do that skillfully and not do it in a way where I call you up and I'm like, hey, Dustin, man, I just, I just want to share something. And I just dump all my stuff onto you. And I'm like, good luck, man. Good luck working with that. Or do I show up to it and I'm like, hey, Dustin, hey, man, do you mind if I just vent for a sec? And I'm sharing from a place of, I don't expect you to fix me. I don't expect you to do anything, but like, I don't want to keep this in anymore. And I just want to share it with somebody. And maybe there's a point where I go, hey, and I'd actually like your perspective on this because I know you've been through this, or, you have this part in your, you're really good at this part in your life. Like, what do you see here? I'm open to your perspective. And so there's a skill set in the sharer. There's also a skill set, which I think is a much harder skill set, in the receiver, in the listener. And I think for men, most men lean towards more of the masculine energy or side, and that is we tend to want to jump in and do and fix. And so often the response is, trying to help the person right away with like, well, why don't you just do this or do this or do this? And that's hardly ever what is needed in those conversations. And really what's needed is just presence, and it's just listening, and it's just reflecting back to the person like, yeah, man, I understand how hard, that must be. I see. And not jumping in to give, advice, but just being a sounding board, just being able to, I'm sure you've heard the term like hold space for another person. And so I
Yeah.
was never taught how to do that, and either side, to share or to be able to receive. And so that is, as you talked about that interaction you had, whether it was hypothetical or real, it's like, that's an example of both parties going into an interaction without a developed skill set to be able to actually have, I would say, meaningful conversation, but also like a productive type of interaction, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, definitely in American society, we just avoid any conversations that are about mental health. And then I think that's really the reason things get so bad, is because we're all neglecting ourselves so much, and then it just comes pouring out. And then people have no idea how to handle that, because it's just overwhelming in terms of substance abuse or the depression, and people can't relate because they've maybe not been there, or they're not feeling that, and so they just sort of check out, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of if someone's listening right now and recognizes anything in their own story, from the things that you've told about your story, and is feeling stuck, or just tired of feeling the way they feel, what is one thing you would tell them to do today to maybe pull themselves out of that?
Put your phone down. Get off your damn phone. Go outside. Go outside for a walk without your phone. and feel uh, the sun on your skin. Notice what the air smells like, tastes like. Feel wind, the breeze on your skin. Notice the ground underneath your feet. And it could be a 10-minute walk. Because the bigger thing that's missing is people are so disconnected from what is happening within them. And the society is so driven to distract, to numb, to escape. There's gambling sites, there's vape pens, there's social media, cell phones, right? There's substances, there's alcohol, there's cannabis, like you name it. There's so many, there's exercise. Exercise isn't necessarily bad, or it's not bad, but it's if you're using it to just numb and escape, constantly putting on music or headphones the second you feel a certain way. And the way we get through this discomfort is actually by learning just to be okay with what our experience is, what we're feeling, and to allow our nervous system to start settling and not live in a constant survival state, constant just being on and always agitated and pissed off at that and blaming this person and this person's the enemy and or feeling this heaviness or sadness and just wanting to push it away. It's like, man, we got to get back to self-connection. We got to get back to slowing down. We got to get back to stillness and present.
I totally agree with that. I've been backing up old home videos from when I was like probably like fourth grade. Uh, and I have such a fond memory of those times, obviously because I have a video of it. But as I like really self-reflect, it's because it was a time where you still like interacted with your neighbors and they would just come out and like hang out in the yard, and no one had all of these distractions. No one, no, everyone now is like you're saying, has like a vape and their phone and their podcast going, and they're constantly feeding themselves so they don't feel anything. But by doing that, you're also completely numb. And so I have a I feel like we kind of got screwed in a way, because I remember the past in a way where it's never going to be that way anymore. You can't even get like a grandma to sit and be present for 5 minutes without checking her TikTok. Everyone's just instantly wanting to do the thing they're addicted to and not be present to avoid whatever they're feeling. So I totally agree with that, and I've been starting to do that as well, going for small walks with no phone, and it's crazy how such a simple thing can make you feel better, and it literally is 10 minutes of your time.
It's so
So
great. Yeah.
I highly recommend that.
Point,
If
just
any
a super quick add, a point B on that. If you're working, if you're at home, if you're whatever, put your phone out of visual sight. So put it in a drawer, something to where, your subconscious sees it and wants to reach for it. So if you just make it less visible to you, it has a similar effect as not having it on you.
If someone wants to work with you, Tim, where should they find you? Your website, LinkedIn?
Yeah, my either one. My website's timperreira.com. I run a men's container that is, has like weekly coaching. We have an 8-week initiation program for men. It's all like brotherhood and community based. So all the guys, it's this amazing group of guys who are fathers, husbands, business owners, sales leaders that are really committed to this kind of work and lean on each other, hold each other accountable, set an example for one another. So we have that. We also do in-person retreats. So we have one coming up at the end of August for men. And then I also do some one-on-one mentorship that I do for men.
Please follow Tim on LinkedIn. He has amazing posts, super inspiring, obviously, if you watched all the way to the end of our conversation here. And once again, Tim, thank you very, very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Appreciate it, man.